Everybody loves bubbles. You either love blowing bubbles or you love popping bubbles. I'm Gavin Hoey, and in this video I'm going to show you what I love to do with bubbles, and that's to photograph them. Now, the idea of today's shoot is to get a photograph of our lovely model, Freya. She's going to be blowing bubbles, and we want to capture the bubbles coming out of the wand. Now, we're going to use a little bit of Photoshop to make sure that the background goes nice and black. But to make life much easier, we're going to set a few things up in the camera and in the positioning of Freya here so we get the best possible picture going into Photoshop. Okay, let's start with camera settings. Now, first of all, I'm going to be working in aperture priority mode. Now, that's either A or AV setting, depending on your camera. Next, I'm going to choose an aperture that's going to work well for this shoot, and that's really the biggest aperture that you can get on your lens. Now, on my lens that's f4, but yours could be f5.6 or even f2.8 if you have a really good lens. Now, next thing I'm going to do is to take a meter reading to work out the shutter speed. Simply frame up the shot, press the shutter, and you've got your meter reading. Now, at the moment, my camera's telling me the metering is an 80th of a second. That's a little bit too slow. We really want a shutter speed of 250th of a second or faster to capture the motion of the bubbles coming out of the wand. Now, in order to do that, I'm going to increase my camera's ISO. So I'm going to put the ISO up to 400 ISO. Now, because this is quite an action sequence, we want to take a lot of pictures very quickly. So I'm going to set the camera to continuous shooting or burst mode so we get a rapid fire session going on. Okay, so there we go. That's the camera set up correctly. But one more thing we need to do, and that's think about the background and the positioning of our subject. Now, ideally, we'd have a background that's in full shadow and a subject that's in sunshine, so there's a good contrast between the subject and the background. It should make the background go nice and dark. But if you can't do that, if it's an overcast day, then simply try and find a dark background. Darker the better. Another thing to do as well is to move your subject away from the background. The reason we've gone for the big aperture is to blow the background out of focus. So you don't want your subject too close. So Freya, can I get you to take a good step forward for me? That's fantastic. And just a little step to the side. Perfect. We also want to have a little bit of room to blow bubbles into as well, so we need to think about that in the composition. Now, another good tip is to move yourself back as well and use the long end of a telephoto zoom lens to go in nice and tight, because again, that'll help to blur the background out of focus. So let's set myself up. Okay, and we're pretty much ready. So Freya, in your own time, if you'd like to blow some bubbles. Excellent. And again. Okay, let's stop there a second. It's a good idea once you've set everything up just to have a quick review before you get carried away. And I can see on the back of the LCD here that I'm getting the background to be in focus on some of the shots. So I'm going to take control and move the focus point right over to the right hand side. Now, when I'm framing that up, I'm going to make sure the focus point is just on Freya's nose here. That should mean her face is nice and sharp, the bubble wand is nice and sharp, and the bubbles come out nice and sharp, shot after shot after shot. Okay, that's the theory. Let's give it a whirl. Okay, are you ready? Let's see your best bubbles. Brilliant. And again, that's fantastic. Brilliant. Okay, so there we go. So I've got some excellent pictures. I see on the back of the camera they look fantastic. So all we need to do now is a little bit of processing using Photoshop. So let's have a look at that bit now. Okay, so I'm back in front of the computer and I've loaded up one of the images from the bubble shoot. And as you can see, it's a fairly straightforward image. It's nice and sharp on our little model here. The bubbles are beautifully sharp and the background's all nice and, well, defocused. But it's not exactly subtle. You can still see that it's a kind of bush thing and you can see leaves, which isn't so good. So what I'm going to do in Photoshop is to make that background go really dark, like it was taken inside of a studio. And to do it, I'm going to use a little trick with layers. Now, this is exactly the same in Photoshop as we're using here, or in Elements. Same technique. So first thing we're going to do is to duplicate the layer. So we're going to go to Layer, and we're going to choose Duplicate Layer. And we'll just click OK. That's going to give us an exact copy of our background layer. Now, on that copy, we're going to change the blend mode, which is currently normal, and we're going to change it to multiply. Now, multiply is going to make your image darker. Great, that's exactly what we want. but we want it darker even than that. So I'm going to duplicate this layer once more. Layer, duplicate layer, and click OK. So now that background has gone very nearly black. There are just a few areas that we need to deal with. So let's do that next. We're going to get the paintbrush tool, and we'll make sure black is our foreground color. And then I'm just going to paint a little bit of black over the areas where we can still see some light coming through. Now these were the really bright spots on the background, and it's inevitable you're going to get a few of these, but to be honest there's not too many. That looks pretty good. There's a few little spots here which are tiny little bits of bubble mixture that are just blowing in the air, so we can deal with those with just a few clicks as well. So there we are. Now she's against a lovely pure black background, very, very dark. But the multiply effect has worked not only on the background, but also on the bubbles and on her face. So we need to just deal with that. Now I'm going to use the eraser tool, but you could use layer masks if you're using the full version of Photoshop. And all I'm going to do is just to run the eraser over her head, like that. We'll get a slightly smaller brush and go over her hand. And then I'm going to go over these little bubbles just to bring the brightness back through there as well. And I'm using the keyboard shortcut of the square brackets. The left one to make your brush smaller, the right one to make your brush bigger. Like that. Now that's looking pretty good, but I think those bubbles could be brighter even more than they are now. So I'm going to drop down one layer onto the middle one of the three I've got and repeat that just for the bubbles, just erasing away everything that is inside the bubbles so they look nice and bright, just as I shot them. There we go, like so. That's looking very nice. I'm happy with that. The multiply blend mode we used had one other effect as well, and that's to really enrichen the colours. And I think they may be a little bit too strong. So let's use an adjustment layer. Layer, new adjustment layer, and we'll choose hue saturation. Now all I'm going to do here is to get the saturation slider and take it to the left hand side just to cool down the colours, particularly on her face where it had gone very, very red. Now once again that has a little bit of an undesirable effect. It's taken away some of the colour from the bubbles. So here again I'm going to get a paintbrush and I'm going to make sure I've got black as my foreground colour, and with a few clicks we can just paint the colour back into the bubbles like so. Okay, so there we go. Let's have a look where we started. That's what we started with, and that's what we've created.